Welcome to Echoes of Ihsan. We're doing a deep dive into Zakat today. You know, as described in Sahih Muslim Hadith, Book 5, we really want to get a good grasp on, like, the core principles of it. Especially, those minimum amounts you always hear about. That triggers Zakat. And what kind of wealth counts.
Yeah.
And plus, we're interested in the social and spiritual side of this whole thing, not just the numbers.
It's really interesting, actually, when you start digging into Sahih Muslim like this. I mean, this book is like a bedrock of Islamic teachings, right?
Totally.
So understanding Zakat through this lens, well, it means looking at Islamic ethics, social responsibility. It's way bigger than just like a financial duty.
Absolutely. And right away, these hadiths, they keep coming back to these minimum amounts for Zakat. Like, there's this line. And once you cross it, then you got to pay.
Exactly. And it's all about balance and practicality. So Islam is saying, hey, you only got to pay this if you can actually afford it,
Makes sense.
Like, for example, they mention 5 wasks of dates or grains, 5 camel heads, and 5 ukiahs of silver.
5 wasks? I don't think my local market carries that much. And 5 camel heads? That's a whole caravan.
Right.
It really makes you realize that wealth was measured so differently back then.
Oh, for sure. Those units of measurement can really trip us up today. Scholars, they figure a wask is about 60 size, and a saw is, well, roughly 3 kilograms.
Okay.
So 5 wasks, we're talking about 900 kilograms. That's serious weight.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's the ukiah. It's roughly 40 grams of silver. So we're not messing around here. We're talking serious wealth.
My piggy bank suddenly feels inadequate.
Right.
But, okay, so we talked about what is zakatable. But I'm noticing these hadiths mention some exemptions too.
Right.
Like, they specifically say no zakat on slaves or horses owned by Muslims.
Yeah, and that's where the historical context gets super interesting.
Right.
So slavery existed, right, but Islam was already pushing to abolish it.
Okay.
So some scholars, they think exempting slaves from zakat, it was a subtle way to discourage the whole thing, making it less appealing financially.
Oh, I see. So it's like using economics to push social change.
Yeah.
Clever.
Exactly.
So what about the horses then?
Well, think about Arabia at that time. Horses were essential for defense, for travel, for everything. So exempting them from zakat, it makes sense, especially for this new Muslim community. They needed to be mobile. They needed to protect themselves.
Yeah. It's like a snapshot of early Islam. You see how their values were actually playing out.
Yeah.
Okay, another thing I noticed. Zakat on crops. It seems like the amount changes depending on how you water them.
Ah, yes. Another great example of how practical Islamic law is. So crops watered naturally, like rain, rivers, they had a higher zakat rate, usually 1/10 of the harvest.
Okay.
But if you irrigated artificially, using camels or whatever, then the rate's lower, usually 1/20.
So more effort you put in, the less zakat you pay. That's a fascinating idea.
Yeah.
But hold on. Does that still work today? I mean, think about modern farming. You've got all this technology, these crazy irrigation systems.
Right.
Does that change things?
That's actually a huge debate among Islamic scholars today. Like, how do you apply those ancient principles to, GMOs, hydroponics,
Right.
huge industrial farms? It's complicated.
Wow, yeah.
But it really shows you how zakat isn't just like a set of fixed rules, It's this dynamic idea that has to keep up with the world.
Totally. Now, let's switch gears a bit. Let's talk about Zakat ul-Fitr.
Okay.
That's the one given at the end of Ramadan, right? The charity of breaking the fast. And it looks like it was originally 1 saw of dates or barley. But wait, you said a saw is a measurement.
It is.
So how much is that, really?
So remember, a saw is about 3 kilos.
Right.
So the original Zakat ul-Fitr, we're talking around 3 kilograms of dates or barley. But over time, what happened is the equivalent for other foods, it changed. People's diets are different. Staple foods vary from place to place.
Right, right. And I noticed this shift towards wheat as the preferred payment historically.
Yeah.
Any reason for that?
Well, wheat just became way more common in a lot of Muslim societies.
Right.
So practicality.
Makes sense.
But also, some scholars, they felt like, offering a better quality food that was more in line with the whole spirit of the thing, making sure everyone had a nice meal for Eid.
Right.
So it's not just about giving something. It's about giving something good, considering what the recipient actually needs.
That's a great point. So the intention behind it matters.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a more serious side of this whole thing. The consequences of not paying zakat. And the hadiths, let me tell you, they don't sugarcoat it.
Right.
They get really vivid.
Oh, yeah.
Describing what happens to those who just don't fulfill this duty.
Yeah, I mean, talk about intense. Plates of fire heated in hellfire
Yeah.
used to cauterize those who didn't pay zakat on their gold and silver. It definitely gets your attention.
And that's the point, right? It's supposed to hit hard.
Yeah.
It's showing you how serious this obligation is. But remember, these descriptions, they have layers of meaning.
So you're saying it's not just about, like, literal punishment in the afterlife.
Exactly. Think about it. What about the turmoil inside?
Mm.
The guilt, the regret. Someone feels that, knowing they haven't upheld this pillar of their faith. The Hadith describes people who didn't pay zakat on their camels being trampled by them, treasures turning into snakes, biting their owners.
Whoa. So, like, their stuff becomes their tormentor.
Right, like a physical reminder of their spiritual negligence. It's powerful stuff.
It really makes you think.
It shows that zakat is so much more than a transaction. It's about purifying your wealth. Acknowledging that everything we have, ultimately, it belongs to God, and we're supposed to use it responsibly.
For the good of everyone.
Yes.
And that brings us to, I guess, a brighter side of all this.
Okay.
The idea of charity beyond zakat, which is called sadaqah. And it seems like the hadiths, they encourage this even if you've already paid your zakat.
Absolutely. Islam is all about going above and beyond, True generosity, it's more than just checking a box. And sadaqah, it covers all kinds of good deeds. Things you do with a sincere intention to please God and help others.
And there are so many ways to do that. The hadiths talk about spending on your family, helping those in need, even something as simple as saying a kind word.
Yeah.
It's amazing that little acts of kindness, if you do them for the right reason, they count as sadaqah.
It's true. Even smiling at your brother, that's sadaqah. Taking something harmful out of the road, that's sadaqah. Guiding someone who's lost, sadaqah. Giving water to someone who's thirsty, sadaqah.
Wow, that really expands what charity means, doesn't it? It's like being kind in all parts of your life.
Exactly. And the reward you get for these actions, even the small ones, it's huge in God's eyes. One hadith says the reward for charity is like a date, but this date grows bigger than a mountain in the hand of God.
Wow. So our little acts of generosity, they're magnified by God. That's beautiful. But there's one last thing I want to talk about. It's the prohibition of zakat for the Prophet's family. The hadiths specifically say the Prophet Muhammad and his family, they couldn't receive zakat.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It shows the special position of the Prophet and his family.
Right.
They had this huge responsibility, delivering God's message, leading the community. And their status, well, it had to be above any doubt. Like, they couldn't be seen as profiting from religious duties.
Yeah. And there are stories about how strictly the Prophet followed this rule. Like, there's one where he throws away a date because he's worried it might be from zakat funds.
Yeah.
You talk about integrity.
Right. That's true leadership. It shows the high standards Islam sets for those in charge. You shouldn't benefit financially from your position. You're supposed to serve humbly, selflessly.
It's not just a rule. It's an example for everyone to follow. This deep dive into zakat has been incredible. We've covered so much. Minimum amounts, exemptions, the spiritual side of it, going above and beyond. What stands out most to you?
Honestly, it's how connected it all is. Zakat isn't just this financial duty. It brings together spiritual devotion, social responsibility, personal growth, the well-being of the whole community. It shows how Islam is about living a good life in every way. It really makes you think how this whole idea of zakat, coming from these ancient traditions, how it can actually apply to the world we live in today with all its problems.
Totally. We were just talking about how zakat's this dynamic concept,
Yeah.
right? Not just some old rule book. And the world today, well, it's a whole different scene compared to the Prophet's time. I mean, we have wealth in forms they couldn't even dream of back then.
Right. I mean, some scholars are really pushing the boundaries of what counts as zakable wealth.
Oh, yeah.
They're talking about stocks, bonds, even intellectual property, digital currencies like Bitcoin, the whole thing. It makes sense, though, right? Yeah.
So much of our wealth is tied up in those things these days. But wouldn't that, completely change how we calculate zak? I mean, the traditional thresholds, they were based on physical stuff,
Right.
Dates, camels, silver, stuff you could actually measure. How do you apply that to, a stock portfolio where the value's always going up and down?
That's the million-dollar question. And Islamic scholars, they're wrestling with it right now.
Not bad?
Some say you just use market values to figure out the zakat on these modern assets.
Okay.
But others are like, no, you need a more complex approach. You got to factor in things like how easy it is to turn that asset into cash and its potential for growth, all that.
It's complicated. So no easy answers then.
Not yet, but the fact that we're even having this conversation is, it's hopeful.
Yeah.
It shows Islam is alive,
Yeah.
It can adapt.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just about, like, the types of wealth that are zakatable, right?
Yeah.
The way we distribute it, that needs to change too. Traditionally, zakat stayed local. But now we live in this globalized world. You got poverty and hardship all over the place.
Yeah.
How do we make sure zakat gets to those who need it most, wherever they are?
That's a huge challenge. It's about expanding our sense of responsibility, thinking beyond our own little corner of the world.
For sure. And, technology, I think it has to play a role here.
Oh, absolutely. We're already seeing some really innovative platforms, organizations using tech to connect Zakat donors with recipients across the globe. They use secure payment systems, track donations, the whole 9 yards.
That's amazing.
It's all about transparency, making sure those funds are actually being used the right way.
Wow. So technology is like bridging that gap.
Okay,
It's connecting us in ways we never could before. And this makes me think, could zakat actually help us tackle some of these like massive global problems we're facing?
Yeah.
Climate change, environmental damage, that kind of stuff.
That's a really interesting thought. Some scholars are saying, yeah, why not? Zakat funds can be used for things like sustainable development, protecting the environment, dealing with climate change, all that.
So it's not just about helping people escape poverty right now. It's about investing in a better future for everyone long term.
Exactly. Imagine Zakat funding renewable energy projects, helping communities hit by natural disasters, even supporting research to solve environmental problems.
It's like a whole new way of looking at zakat. We're not just giving charity, we're taking responsibility for our planet.
Right. And Zakat, with its focus on social justice and taking care of each other, it's perfect for that.
It's not just about giving money, it's about building a better world.
Exactly. A more sustainable world. A fairer world.
This deep dive has seriously changed how I see zakat. It's not just some outdated thing. It's this vibrant principle that connects to so many parts of our lives, our world.
And we've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore. That's what's so cool about Zakat. It keeps you thinking, keeps you debating, keeps you innovating.
I'm ready for more. What other amazing zakat stuff awaits us in part 3? Welcome back to the deep dive. It's incredible how, even though zakat is rooted in these ancient traditions, it still feels so relevant to, like, the world today.
Yeah, for real.
Okay.
I think it speaks to the wisdom behind these Islamic teachings. We've been unpacking so much, And what really strikes me is how Zakat brings together your spiritual devotion with, like, actually doing something good. It's not just faith in your head. You're putting it into practice.
I agree. And, something that's come up over and over this deep dive is the whole thing about intention.
Yeah.
It's not just the act of giving, but the why behind it.
Yeah.
It's got to come from the heart. You're doing it to please God, to actually benefit someone else.
You hit the nail on the head. In Islam, that sincerity, it's called ikhlas. And it's like the foundation of everything. Any act of worship, it's got to have that. Zakat is no different. All those hadiths we talked about, they make it so clear. Even a little bit. If it's given with pure intention, that's way more valuable than a ton of money given grudgingly or just to show off.
So true. It reminds you that real generosity, it's not about the amount, it's about where it comes from.
Absolutely.
It's about recognizing, everything we have, it's a gift.
Yeah.
And we're entrusted to use it wisely.
Exactly. And this focus on intention, it leads to something else really interesting about Zakat, the way it can actually change you as a person.
Oh, yeah.
We usually think about how Zakat helps the person receiving it.
Right.
But it also has this deep impact on the giver. It purifies your wealth, It loosens that grip that material things can have on us.
Okay.
And it helps you become more grateful, more content.
It's like a spiritual spring cleaning or something.
That's a good way to put it. When you let go of some of your wealth, you start to see that your happiness, your security, they don't come from stuff. You're surrendering. You're acknowledging that God is the true provider.
I like that.
And wealth. It's supposed to be a blessing, not something that weighs you down.
So you're shifting from this, like, scarcity mindset to one of abundance.
Exactly. You realize that true wealth, it's about your connection with God.
Yeah.
And your capacity for generosity, for compassion.
Beautiful. And that shift, it doesn't just change how you feel, right? It changes how you act in the world.
100%. When you're generous, it cultivates empathy. It softens your heart. And you just naturally want to be kind to others.
It's like a domino effect of goodness. Zakat starts this cycle,
It does.
Generosity breeds more generosity. compassion spreads, and the result is hopefully a more just, more harmonious society.
That's it. That's Zakat in a nutshell. It's not just about alleviating poverty. It's about creating a whole culture of giving. We share responsibility, we support each other, we understand we're all connected, and we all have a part to play in making sure everyone can thrive.
You know, this deep dive has really opened my eyes. I'm thinking differently about my relationship with wealth, with my responsibility towards those who are struggling. And the power of giving, I mean, it can really make a difference. I feel inspired.
That's what I love about exploring these topics. Zakat shows how relevant, how wise these Islamic teachings are even today. It addresses our challenges and our hopes for the future.
For sure. Well, and everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
We hope this deep dive into Zakat has sparked some new ideas and maybe inspired you to think about what it means in your own life and in the world around you. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.